Alright, let's talk about economics. I know, it can seem super complicated. It's full of charts and graphs and acronyms that sound like they were invented just to confuse us. But stick with me, because today we're tackling two of the biggest ones, GDP and GNP. You hear these on the news all the time. People say things like, the GDP is up, or the nation's GNP is a key indicator, and we're all supposed to nod along like we know what's happening. These letters are really important. They are attempts to measure a country's entire economic output. Think of them as a report card for a country's economy. They try to answer a simple question: how much stuff did we make? First things first, what do they even stand for? It's pretty straightforward. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. The key word there is domestic. Think at home. It's about what gets made inside a country's borders. Then we have GNP, which stands for Gross National Product. Here, the important word is national. Think citizens. It's about what a country's people and companies make, no matter where in the world they are doing the making. So one is about the place and the other is about the people. They both measure the total value of all the goods and services produced, but they draw the line in different places. Understanding these two terms is like having a secret decoder ring for the economy. When you hear a politician talking about economic growth, they are almost always talking about one of these two numbers. They are the headline figures, the big kahunas of economic statistics. They help governments make decisions about things like taxes and spending. They also help businesses decide where to build new factories or open new stores. And for us, well, they give us a clue about whether the economy is getting bigger or smaller, which can affect everything from job opportunities to the price of a cup of coffee. So to recap this first part, GDP and GNP are both ways to measure the size of an economy. They count up all the finished goods like cars and laptops, and all the services like haircuts and financial advice produced over a certain period, usually a year. They put a dollar value on all that activity. The big, crucial, don't forget this difference, is how they define the economy. Is it everything made within a country's lines on a map? Or is it everything made by a country's citizens, wherever they may be living and working? That one little difference is what we're going to unpack. And don't worry, it's less complicated than it sounds. Let's zoom in on Gross Domestic Product, or GDP. The domestic part is your biggest clue. GDP measures the total value of everything produced within a country's geographic borders. It doesn't matter who owns the company that's doing the producing. If it's made on that country's soil, it counts towards its GDP. Think of it like a giant cash register for a single country. Every car, every smartphone, every pizza, and every doctor's visit that happens inside the country's borders gets rung up. It's a measure of the economic activity happening right there, on that specific patch of land. Here's a simple example. Let's say a Japanese car company, like Toyota, has a factory in Kentucky, USA. All the cars that roll off that factory's assembly line are counted as part of the United States GDP. Why? Because the factory is physically located in the United States. The profits might go back to Japan and the company's headquarters might be in Tokyo. But because the production, the actual making of the cars, happened within the US, it boosts the US GDP. It's a geographical measurement, plain and simple. The location of the production is the only thing that matters. This works the other way too. Imagine an American company like Apple designs its iPhones in California, but has them assembled in a factory in China. The value of that final assembly process would be counted in China's GDP, not the US GDP. The American company owns the brand and gets the lion's share of the profit, but the physical work of putting the phone together happened on Chinese soil. So for GDP, the nationality of the company or the workers is irrelevant. It's all about where the economic activity physically takes place. This makes GDP a really good indicator of the level of production and employment within a specific country. So, why is GDP so popular? Most countries today, including the United States, use GDP as their main measure of economic health. It gives a clear picture of the strength of a country's internal economy. If a country's GDP is growing, it usually means there are more jobs being created. Businesses are doing well, and there's more economic activity happening within its borders. This is incredibly useful information for policymakers. They want to know if their policies are helping to create jobs and stimulate activity at home. GDP gives them a direct answer to that question, which is why you hear about it on the news so much more often than its cousin GNP. Now let's switch gears and talk about gross national product or GNP. The key word here, as we said, is national. GNP measures the total value of all goods and services produced by the residents and businesses of a country, regardless of where that production occurs. So while GDP was all about the where, GNP is all about the who. It follows the citizens and their companies around the world. If an American citizen or an American-owned company makes something, it counts towards the United States GNP, even if they made it in Germany, Brazil, or on the moon. Let's go back to our examples. That Toyota factory in Kentucky? The value of the cars it produces counts towards Japan's GNP, because Toyota is a Japanese-owned company. Even though the production happened in the US, the income generated ultimately belongs to a Japanese national. It's a measure of the economic power of a country's people and firms. So, the cars are part of US GDP because of location, but also part of Japan's GNP because of ownership. It can be a little confusing, but the distinction is crucial. GNP tracks the money back to the owner's home country. And what about that iPhone assembled in China by an American company? Under the GNP system, the value added by that production would be counted as part of the US GNP. Why? Because Apple is an American company. The profits from those sales flow back to the United States. So, the activity contributes to China's GDP because it happened there, but it contributes to America's GNP because it was an American company doing it. GNP is therefore a measure of a nation's wealth and income, not just its domestic production. It tells you how well a country's citizens and businesses are doing on a global scale. So can GNP and GDP ever be the same? Yes, theoretically. If a country had a perfectly closed economy, meaning no foreign companies operated within its borders, and none of its citizens or companies operated abroad, then its GDP and GNP would be identical. Everything produced in the country would be produced by its citizens, and its citizens would produce nothing outside the country. But in our modern, super interconnected global economy, this is basically impossible. There's always some level of international investment and citizens working abroad, so there will always be a difference, however small, between a country's GDP and GNP. So we have GDP, the measure of what's made inside a country, and GNP, the measure of what a country's people make anywhere in the world. The key difference is how they treat income from foreign sources. GDP includes income made by foreign-owned companies within a country's borders, but excludes income made by its citizens abroad. GNP does the exact opposite. It excludes the income made by foreigners at home, but includes the income made by its citizens working overseas. It's a fundamental difference in perspective. One is focused on the domestic economy, the other on the national wealth. Why would a country prefer one over the other? For a country like Ireland, which has a lot of multinational corporations like Google and Apple operating there due to favourable tax laws, its GDP is much higher than its GNP. A ton of production happens within its borders, but a lot of the profits from that production are sent back to the company's home countries. So Ireland's GDP makes its domestic economy look huge, but its GNP, which subtracts those profits, gives a more accurate picture of the actual income its citizens receive. In this case, GNP is arguably a better measure of the country's true economic well-being. On the other hand, a country like the Philippines, which has a large number of citizens working overseas and sending money home, known as remittances, might find GNP to be a very useful statistic. The income these workers earn abroad doesn't show up in the Philippines' GDP because the work isn't happening there. But it is a massive and vital part of the national income, so it gets counted in its GNP. For the Philippines, GNP provides a fuller picture of the total income flowing to its people. In contrast, the US switched from using GNP to GDP as its primary measure in 1991, arguing that GDP was more relevant for tracking short-term economic fluctuations and employment. So, which one is more useful? It really depends on what you want to know. Today, most economists and governments prefer GDP. It's seen as a better indicator of the health of the domestic economy, the level of production, spending, and job creation happening right now within the country. It directly measures the activity that affects most residents' day-to-day lives. While GNP is great for understanding a nation's global financial position, GDP is the go-to metric for judging if the internal economic engine is humming along nicely. It's not that one is right and the other is wrong, but for practical policy-making purposes, GDP has won the popularity contest. It tells a clearer story about the here and now.